Hello everyone, I am the Minute Kirby. Welcome to my channel, the Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews and other deck techs. On this episode of the Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on a commander from March of the Machine, Goro-Goro and Satoru. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. But the very best way you can help support the channel is with my Patreon. There are plenty of perks for being a patron, such as early access to certain videos, exclusive deck techs, gifts, and more. You can also support my channel for free by simply liking, subscribing, and sharing, which also helps out a lot. I put out a video every Monday, so you don't want to miss out. You can join my Discord server for free if you want to join the Commander Tavern community. All pertinent links are down in the description. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Goro-Goro and Satoru is a 3/4 goblin human for 1 blue, 1 black, and 1 red. They have an interesting trigger that gets you a 5/5 flying dragon spirit token whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player. The only caveat is that those creatures have to have entered the battlefield that turn. This ability might seem incredibly restricting, considering you only get 1 token per opponent hit, regardless of how many creatures hit them, and only if the creatures had entered the battlefield that turn. Fortunately, they have an activated ability that gives creatures you control haste for just 2 mana. The deck aims to make the most of the Dragon Spirit token creation trigger. This means that the deck has synergistic strategies to dragons as well as ninjutsu, so there are plenty of ninjas as well as a dragon tribal subtheme. Let's start with the former, since this is a great way to keep triggering our commander. Fallen Shinobi, Ingenious Infiltrator, Ninja of the Deep Hours, Yuriko the Tiger's Shadow, and Higura the Still Wind can be ninjutsu'd in to provide card advantage, so they're some of the best ninjas to include, along with the next sets I'll show you in a bit. Fallen Shinobi provides card advantage in the form of playing the top 2 cards of defending player's library, so make sure you don't play lands into your second main phase, just in case you exile a land from an opponent. Then you can play theirs instead. Ingenious Infiltrator and Ninja of the Deep Hours simply draws a card on combat damage. Yuriko can get us a ton of cards in our hand if multiple ninjas are hitting our opponents. If that weren't enough, all opponents lose life equal to the casting cost of those cards we're putting into our hand, which, since they're not being drawn, won't trigger any adverse effects for us drawing cards. Higura tutors for ninjas whenever he deals combat damage, which is possibly one of the best ninjas in the deck. If that weren't enough, you could pay 2 generic to make a ninja unblockable. The deck does have other ways of making our creatures unblockable though, not necessarily limited to ninjas. Access Tunnel, Rogue's Passage, Archetype of Imagination, and Swen Xuan Lord of Wu do just that. The first 2 don't even take up slots in the deck for being lands. Them tapping for colorless isn't that troublesome in this deck since it has plenty of ways to fix our mana. The creatures are absolutely busted. With the archetype, we can only be blocked by creatures with reach, and with Swen Xuan, we can only be blocked by creatures with horsemanship. These are super clutch for our ninjas to be able to keep hitting once they've been on the battlefield, or to make other creatures unblockable to ninjutsu in new ninjas. Mistblade Shinobi, Okibagang Shinobi, Skull Snatcher, and Throw Slitter are some more ninjas that are definitely worth their slot here since they provide interactive effects. Mistblade Shinobi bounces a creature, Okibagang Shinobi has the player discard 2 cards. These combo amazingly well for hellbent opponents. Skull Snatcher helps against graveyard dependent decks, and Throw Slitter is repeatable Doomblade. They're quite useful. Prosperous Thief, Sakashima Student, Thousand Face Shadow, Silver Fur Master, and Walker of Secret Ways are more ninjas to ninjutsu in, but these provide various benefits that aren't simply drawing cards or disrupting opponents. Prosperous Thief has the potential of creating 3 treasure tokens if we're hitting each opponent with a ninja or rogue. Sakashima Student can enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature for just 2 mana. This entering the battlefield as the best or biggest creature before combat damage is dealt is no joke. Thousand Face Shadow does something similar, but only if you're attacking with the best or biggest creature, since it creates a token copy of it when it enters the battlefield attacking. Silver Fur Master not only makes it easier to activate ninjutsu by reducing its cost, but it also pumps other ninjas and rogues by +1/+1. Walker of Secret Ways lets us look at the defending player's hand when it deals combat damage. However, that's just an amazing bonus. Its main reason for being in the deck is that it has ninjutsu, plus it lets us bounce a ninja for just 2 mana. This allows us to ninjutsu it later on. In fact, Erratic Portal and Crystal Shard are included for the same reason. Fortunately, unlike the ninja, we can activate these at instant speed. We can bounce any creature to our hand at the end of an opponent's turn to then cast it later to help trigger our commander, or bounce ninjas to ninjutsu them in later on. They can also be used defensively to protect any creature that will be dealt with, or we can also use them against any threats coming our way from a tapped out opponent. They also synergize amazingly with Sneak Attack, also in the deck. Sneak Attack can cheat in any creature from our hand with haste for just 1 red mana. It does get sacrificed afterwards, but we can just bounce them in response with the previously mentioned artifacts. Or we can ninjutsu them back to our hand with a ninja after we deal combat damage, at the end of combat step of the combat phase where we can still use ninjutsu. Timing here is very important. Speaking of, Satoru Umezawa does something similar. Although it does cost 4 times as much, we can ninjutsu in any creature from our hand. This ability is incredibly strong in this deck, especially when we see which dragons I'm running. Between the ninjas, ways to cheat in creatures, and bounce them back to our hand, we create a revolving door of creatures that will always be dealing combat damage the same turn they enter the battlefield. Throat Seeker, the final ninja card of the deck, doesn't have ninjutsu, but is an amazing ninja lord nonetheless. The deck is very aggressive, so being able to gain a ton of life each combat allows us the benefit of swinging in with as many creatures as we can, especially if they're unblockable, and not worry too much about the clapback, especially since we'll be creating blockers in the form of 5/5 Flying Dragon Spirits. And Berserker's Onslaught makes it so that we get twice as many dragons off of our commander's trigger. This enchantment has a static ability, not a triggered ability. This means that as long as our creature is attacking, it has double strike. Did you ninjutsu in a ninja in response to the damage step of the combat phase? It has double strike, and thus you get 2 5/5 flyers for your trouble. Besides the ninjas that provide card advantage, the deck is also running Biden of Thassa, Coastal Piracy, and Reconnaissance Mission. That way we can also draw a card per creature connecting regardless of why or how, since they're not restrictive. We draw a card per creature we control dealing combat damage to an opponent. If they had double strike, we draw 2 cards. As a bonus, the Biden can also be activated to force an opponent to attack with all their creatures, leaving them up for an alpha strike afterwards. If we controlled more than one of these enchantments, then things will get even further out of hand. So much so that the deck is running Reliquary Tower, Thought Vessel, and Decanter of Endless Water. The first one doesn't take up a slot in the deck, and the other 2 are amazing mana rocks, especially considering the deck isn't green. That isn't to say that the deck's mana acceleration is independent of mana rocks. On the contrary, these 2 are only half of the mana rocks in the deck, the other 2 being Arcane Signet and Soul Ring. But we'll see the rest of the mana acceleration pieces of the deck soon enough. Suffice it to say that they are land-based. Now that we saw the deck's ninjas and how we treat our battlefield like a revolving door between our hand and the table, let's see the dragons these ninjas fly upon. Ganak's Astral Hunter, Scourge of Valkis, Golagan's The Storm's Fury, Silumgar the Drifting Death, and Invasion of Tarkir are absolutely busted here. Ganax triggers whenever it or another dragon enters the battlefield, creating a treasure when it does. This gives a considerable avenue for mana acceleration. Scourge of Valkis also has an ETB trigger that can potentially accelerate our opponent's demise. Whether it or another dragon enters the battlefield, it deals X damage to any target, where X is the number of dragons we control. We're going to be creating tons of dragons, so this could very easily kill off any opponents or wipe the board of potential blockers, kill off opponents, defeat our battle, etc. Cologan is absolutely insane in this deck. At face value, it's a 4/5 with flying for 5 mana, which isn't that bad. However, whenever a dragon we control attacks, creatures we control get +1/+0. That's right, not just creatures, not just dragon creatures, just creatures. So if we attack with multiple dragons, all of our creatures get pumped. If that weren't enough, since Cologan has dash, it's its own revolving door. Its dash cost is the same as its casting cost, which is fine, but each turn we could pay 5 mana to get it onto the battlefield and trigger our commander. Silumgar also has an attack trigger. This one weakens our opponent's creatures, potentially killing them off altogether. With the number of dragons we hope to accumulate, each time we alpha strike we can kill off blockers before they even have a chance to block. It also has Hexproof, which is quite the bonus. The battle has the potential of dealing considerable damage if we have some dragons in our hand, but that's just a bonus. Its true worth is when we defeat it, getting Defiant Thundermaw for our efforts. With so many flyers and ways to make our creatures unblockable, this should be quite easy to achieve. Then we have yet another Dragon Lord that triggers on attack. Whenever a dragon we control attacks, it deals 2 damage to any target. This creature does some serious work. Between this and Scourge of Valkis, cloning these with Sakashima's Student or Thousand Face Shadow is absolutely insane. So much so that Glasspool Mimic is usually safe for them when I either have either of these 2 dragons on the battlefield. Granted, it could also copy any creature we control, but having multiples of either Scourge of Valkis or Defiant Thundermaw is amazing. It also doesn't take up a slot in the deck since its backside is a land, assuming you aren't greedy and play it as a land if you needed to. Speaking of copy effects, another way the deck has creatures attacking the turn they enter the battlefield is by creating hasty copies of them. To that end, Orthion, Hero of Lavabrink, Kiki-Jiki Mirror Breaker, and Fable of the Mirror Breaker are also included. Granted, the saga has to transform first, but in the meantime, it gives us a token creature that can attack to get us a treasure, and then ramages for 2. But when it transforms into Reflection of Kiki-Jiki, then we can also use it to make hasty copies. Of these, the best one is Kiki-Jiki since he doesn't require mana, only tapping. Plus, he has haste himself. Orthion is a close second. His second ability is very high costed, but creating 5 hasty token copies of another creature we control could end the game, especially if that creature is Scourge of Valkis or Defiant Thundermaw. They themselves and Hum of the Host also create hasty tokens and are possibly the best equipment in the deck. With how Myriad works, we're creating attackers that will trigger our commander if they connect. Equipping this to any creature that couldn't be blocked is absolutely backbreaking, even more so with the ETB triggers it can trigger. Hum of the Host triggers at the beginning of each combat. Since the copy isn't legendary, equipping this to our commander is absolute insanity. Or to Kikijiki, since the clone isn't legendary. That means that you can activate it to clone itself and then keep going until you get as many Kikijiki clones as you want. It's also busted when equipped to any of our other legendary dragons. I love this cloning suite in the deck. It's both fun and busted. Going back to Dragon Synergies, the deck is running Dragon's Horde, Kindred Discovery, and Black Market Connections. The artifact is a mana rock when needed, but whenever a dragon enters the battlefield under our control, it starts accumulating counters that we can then remove to draw cards. This card is incredibly useful here. Kindred Discovery is absolutely insane here as well. If we choose Dragon, then we'll draw a card whenever a dragon we control attacks, as well as when one enters the battlefield. Since we're creating dragons and then attacking with them, this will draw us a ton of cards. Best of all, we can also choose Ninja if we wanted to. We'd only trigger it when they enter the battlefield though, because if we don't attack with them, we don't get the trigger. So ninjutsuing them in will not trigger it. Black Market Connections does it all. If it's too expensive, you can swap it out for Phyrexian Arena. However, keep in mind that we can also create treasures and changelings, so we get mana as well as potential ETB triggers. Since changelings are also dragons, we trigger those previously seen effects. Speaking of, Maskwick Nexus is also included. That way, every creature triggers the dragon effects. It can also create changelings to further that strategy. This artifact isn't 100% necessary for the deck to run, but getting it with the various synergies and engines online makes you glad you did. Going back to those dragon synergies, Sarkhan the Masterless and Savitri Dragon Master are the only planeswalkers in the deck. Sarkhan's triggered ability is amazing here since it makes opponents think twice about attacking us once we have a couple of dragons in play, especially against weenie token decks. That way we only need to keep a handful of creatures up to block if most of them will be killed off by Sarkhan's ability. If that weren't enough, Sarkhan can turn all of our walkers into 4/4 dragons with flying. More than likely he'll be the only one unless we also have Savitri, but him alone is good enough. Keep in mind that with Sarkhan being a creature, we can activate him first, then equip him with Hum of the Host before combat. Once combat starts, we get a token copy of Sarkhan, which will let us use his loyalty abilities on our second main phase. Hum of the Host is so busted, I love it. His -3 also gives us yet another dragon, which the deck won't mind at all. Savitri also makes it difficult for opponents to attack into us since they'd have to pay 2 life for each creature coming our way. Her -3 can be used the same turn she enters the battlefield, tutoring for any dragon. This is amazing at getting our key dragons like Ganax, Scourge of Valkis, etc. Her ultimate provides an amazing board wipe with the potential of being one-sided. We do lose all of our own non-dragon creatures unless we control Maskwick Nexus. Same with Crux of Fate, which is also in the deck. More often than not, we're choosing the mode that destroys all non-dragon creatures, unless we're somehow facing another tribal dragon deck, but we have more ninjas than dragons. In that case, just blow up all the dragons. Similarly, the deck is running Perplexing Test for the same reason. The deck is creating a ton of creature tokens. Being able to bounce all non-token creatures at instant speed is incredibly busted in this deck. We get to keep all of our dragon tokens and copy tokens, while bouncing all the creatures that can then be recast later on to keep triggering our commander. It's also amazing to cast in response to someone alpha striking us, or at the beginning of the end step of the turn before ours, in order to clear the board for our own alpha strike with our own tokens. Sure, overloading Cyclonic Rift is the best way to achieve this, but at least the previous 2 spells and Savitri's ultimate allows us to get around it for a lower investment in mana. That being said, overloading this at the end of the turn before ours, swinging out with everything at each opponent, tends to be an immediate GG. Back to creating dragon tokens, Feywild Visitor helps us create dragon tokens even if the creature triggers our commander or not. Sure, the dragon is a puny 1/1 instead of a 5/5, but we're still getting a chump blocker or potential creature to ninjutsu out if any opponent were unable to block it. Also, it'll trigger anything that cares about dragons entering the battlefield, attacking, or just outright existing. This enchantment is amazing here, especially with the next 2, Crucible of Fire and Dragon Tempest. Crucible of Fire only pumps our dragons +3/+3, but it only costs 4 mana to do so. In any case, the deck is creating a bunch of dragons, so this enchantment goes hard. It goes even harder thanks to Maskwick Nexus. Dragon Tempest is amazing here as well, since it gives haste to a flyer when it enters the battlefield, which is amazing synergy with our commander. If that weren't enough, it has the same triggered ability as Scourge of Valkis, which is absolute madness. The following cards are needed by all decks, which are the Interaction, Card Advantage, and Mana Acceleration pieces. An offer you can't refuse, Swan Song and Negate is the deck's counter magic suite, with Chaos Warp being the amazing catch-all that it is. The counter spells are mostly for preventing any board wipes we don't want resolving to resolve. They can also prevent the combo player from winning, combo being an aggro deck's main weakness. Mystic Sanctuary is included to recover these or any other instant or sorcery via top decking. It's also fetchable, which is very important. The deck is running all 9 fetch lands, so that shouldn't be an issue to do at instant speed before drawing a card for that pro gamer move. Just make sure you're cracking a fetch land that can get an island. Don't be that player. Champion's Helm, Giant's Amulet, Lightning Greaves, and Swiftfoot Boots help protect our key creatures from targeted removal. While the deck is designed around the commander, they aren't 100% required for the deck to function. That being said, they're also very cheap to cast the first time at 3 mana, so recasting them multiple times in a game shouldn't be an issue. But we can protect them with either of these. That being said, these are more for protecting the busted creatures we've seen so far. As for casting our spells, Wayfarer's Bauble and Navigation Orb help us accelerate our mana production. Land-based mana acceleration is the way to go, and these are amazing in non-green decks like this one. Hopefully we draw them early game along with our mana rocks. Bitterthorn, Nissa's Animus, Sword of the Animus, and Sword of Hearth and Home are the remaining mana acceleration pieces. These depend on combat, but the deck is aggro anyways. The first 2 don't even care about defense since they trigger on attack. In any case, the deck has plenty of flyers plus ways of making our creatures unblockable. Sword of Hearth and Home triggers on combat damage, but it does provide relevant protection since it's the only 2 colors the deck isn't. It also blinks, which is a nice bonus. That has the potential of returning an attacker into a defensive position while also triggering any effects that care about a creature entering the battlefield. The rest of the deck is just the rest of the lands. The deck's running all 3 opponent lands, all 3 shock lands, Xandar's Lounge, Smoldering Marsh, Sunken Hollow, Command Tower, Ancient Tomb, and Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth to help our color fixing, especially with those colorless land sources, as well as 3 of each basic land due to all of the basic land ramp effects in the deck. As with all my deck techs, you can build your mana base according to your budget. Whether you include more expensive cards or even cheaper cards is up to you. You do you. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Goro-Goro and Satoru. What I love most about this deck is that it's not simply a Dragon Tribal and a Ninja Tribal deck, which at face value is already pretty cool since that's a unique tribal combination. There's a lot of nuance to it since you can add a lot of synergistic effects to get a lot of different interconnecting engines going that isn't just smashing face, even though you're also smashing face. To me, this is a deck that plays a lot of different things at once, which is my favorite kind of deck. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TTG Player affiliate link. That also helps out the channel. As always, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am the Meta Kirby, and happy brewing.